Oh.
No, seriously, we'd like to keep the desk.
The Colleyville City Council work session for August the 6th, 2019 is
Showing you
now
how
in
it's
order
done.
as of 5:31. Thank you guys for being here. We got a lot to cover in 1 hour. And it's amazing that we're going to cover the budget in 1 hour, but I believe Mark can do it. So Mark, you ready to go? Ready, get right to it. Oh, I need to call the roll.
Oh,
That'd be
yes, sir.
Christine was giving me the dirty look. Councilmember Nakamura is gone. Tim Linden.
Here.
Councilmember Wheat.
Here.
Mayor's here. Councilmember Dodson.
Here.
Councilmember Kelly.
Here.
Councilmember Rigney.
Here.
We're ready to go.
Very efficient.
All right, good evening, Marion City Council. Tonight we're going to be talking all about the budget during this work session, the proposed budget. So it's an exciting time. We started this process back in March with staff with our budget kickoff, and that's kind of gone through springtime, summer. We talked about the preliminary numbers back in June with you, the City Council. We have the final numbers now, and we have made a proposed budget submission to you. So there's two items. This first item is really procedural in nature. The Texas Property Tax Code requires that we submit the certified roll to the City Council, so that's what this first item is for. It's really just procedural. So we'll talk about these numbers, kind of what they mean in terms of the budget with the next item, with the proposed budget. But these are the certified numbers, tax roll that we received from the appraisal district that was certified in July, into July. So these are the 2019 certified values. It's for fiscal year 2020, calendar year, tax year 2019. So as I mentioned, Texas property tax law requires that we submit this to the City Council. It also requires that we submit the effective tax rate and the rollback property tax rates to the City Council as well. It's all a part of the truth in taxation laws for the state. So the 2019 certified tax roll came in right at $5.7 billion. Properties currently under appeal, incomplete appraisals, and in process accounts came in at $128 million. You add those two together and you get the projected assessed valuation of $5.8 billion for tax year 2019. So the $5.8 billion is what we key in on for the tax revenue for next year.
Even though there's a significant number of those are still under
Yes.
review
Yep. And we generally get that
in March
every year.
or so.
Yep.
300,000.
New construction for the year is $105 million. We had quite a few new home permits last year, and so that's reflected in the new construction value. This value of $5.8 billion represents a 7% increase over the current year's valuation of $5.4 billion. So still going up, still very healthy market. The incremental value for the TIF was $438 million. That's broken out. TIF Zone 1, so the original TIF, $422 million, and then TIF, the 1A, is $15 million. So you add those two together and you get $438 million is the incremental value for the TIF. So that went up about 8.5% from last year. We'll talk about that in the next presentation as well. So with all that equates to the calculation that our tax assessor collector compiles for us is the rollback rate and the effective tax rate. Just a reminder, the effective tax rate is the tax rate that brings in the same amount of property tax revenue this year as it did last year, excluding new construction. So and we'll talk about this again later too, but it doesn't necessarily mean the property tax payment will be exactly equal, because there are certain circumstances like the over 65 exemption and the property tax freeze that may cause some of that property tax revenue to be redistributed between other property tax payers. But it means that the city will take in the same amount of property tax revenue next year as this year, excluding new construction. So that effective tax rate came in at 0.306807 per $100 valuation, and the rollback rate, which is the highest amount rate that you could take without going to the voters for an election, it came in at 0.330314 per $100 valuation. So we are recommending the effective tax rate for next fiscal year. So it'll be the second consecutive year. So for future years with the with the legislation that was passed, this past legislative session, this effective rate, that will, next year will be called basically no new tax, no new revenue rate, and the rollback rate will be the voter approved tax rate. So voters will have to approve to go above that rollback rate.
Oh, I did go through that spreadsheet where all this is calculated. Me and Adrian were talking about this. That rollback rate is the 8%.
Correct.
Yes.
State 8%.
Still
And
8%.
that is tax rate, 8% tax rate increase.
Yep.
Austin is gonna take it.
Huh?
Austin City is gonna take the
Are
8%.
they? Wow.
So next year, that 8% will go down to 3.5%.
3.5, yeah.
On
Be
the
the
revenue,
maximum.
not rate.
Right.
That's true.
That's a major change. Also, there's one other one that we typically haven't been talking about because we're always under it, but our charter has a 7% revenue increase rate.
That's correct.
And when Jim Moore was alive, he'd always demand that get computed.
Okay.
I don't know what that
Yep.
number is, but it's below, I mean, it's higher than
Of course.
Absolutely.
the effective tax rate by ways. I don't know why it compares to the 8%.
I was thinking it was lower. It was like 5 or something.
It's a 7% revenue cap.
Okay.
Revenue cap.
Okay. So it's
Real
not
revenue
rated.
cap.
That's great. That's great.
So that's the tax roll.
Great.
Excellent.
Great.
Cool.
Good
So
hard
next.
work there, kids. We appreciate y'all.
So next we'll move into the exciting stuff, the proposed budget. So we'll talk about 4 items tonight: property values and the proposed tax rate, the 2020 revenues and expenditures by fund. So the funds we're going to talk about are the general fund, utility fund, drainage fund, and debt service fund. We'll talk through quickly the CIP projects. We've already had a separate work session on those, but we'll present those to you again. We'll talk about our next steps to ultimate approval of this budget. So again, these are the certified values. You can see those compared to the same time last year. Again, it's a 7% increase. Of that 7% increase, 28% came from new construction, 72% came from existing property. You can see the TIF value increased by 8.5% to that 438 million. And then you subtract out the TIF. So not in TIF is 5.4 billion compared to 5 billion last year, this time. So again,
Interesting, we had more new construction this year than last year.
correct, yes. We had about 169 building permits, I believe.
You're gonna see that dip a little bit next year.
Yeah. I think so.
Yeah, and that dip is, we're reflecting that in our revenue projections in the general fund.
You say go down?
Yes. Your home starts aren't as high as they were
Yeah.
last year.
Yeah. That's what.
We're running out of lots.
Unless we keep turning them down.
So all that to say, we are recommending the effective tax rate for the second consecutive year. Last year was a huge feat in adopting that effective tax rate, and then 2 years in a row is even, a great accomplishment for the city council. There's not a lot of cities that do that, especially in this environment with the new legislation coming forward, and this is the last chance you have to increase it to that 8%. But our strategy is take in what you need, justify anything above that. That's been stated several times, and so that's what this budget reflects. Just because you can take it doesn't mean we're going to take it. We're just going to take what we need to operate the city efficiently.
That's the way real government should work. We appreciate you guys hustling that for us.
So as you can see, the 2019 tax rate, or the fiscal year 20 rate is 0.306807. We have to change that thing so many times on these resolutions. That number has just been ingrained in my brain. How that breaks out, the INS rate, the debt service rate, was decreased to 0.016379. The M&O, or the operational tax rate, 0.290430, for a total tax rate reduction of almost 1.4 cents per $100.
Great.
So,
Awesome.
You know what our total debt remaining is approximately?
It was on there. It's on one of the sheets.
The total debt, I don't recall off the top of my head.
Well,
I know
it shows
there's
that.
numbers for next year, but I don't.
It shows that,
I'd be guessing.
I think it's on the sheet. It shows that the final debt is in 28.
2028, yes.
And I think there's a number on there.
Yeah.
It's significant. After 2020,
Yeah.
it drops dramatically.
Right now, total expenditures is for 2020 is 1.4.
Yeah.
Then it goes 698, 701, then
Right.
578.
Yeah, so it's a dramatic, it's like 50% drop.
That's right.
And then most of that is, it looks like from the fire, I guess, the fire
Trucks.
I'm sorry.
So in 20, we'll talk about them, in
Refunding
20, we're
bonds.
recommending a new ambulance.
Yeah, we have refunding bonds that'll cut out 500 grand.
Yeah, Mark,
Last year was
go ahead.
1.8, so everybody knows that as well. So it's a $500,000 drop already.
Oh, yeah.
So I want to hit home what I said earlier in the certified role presentation, but the effective tax rate, again, same amount of revenue last year to this year, or next year, excluding new growth. As you can see, it doesn't necessarily mean the property tax payment will be exactly identical. The city does have over 65, when you hit 65, you're eligible for a $65,000 exemption, and also your property taxes are frozen at that point.
Right.
So that frozen value lost is reflected, so we have to still collect that same amount of property tax. And so that means that it has to kind of be redistributed among different property tax payers. So that could be a reason for a little bit of an increase in an individual property tax payment.
Good
You can
explanation.
see that between
Right.
19 and 20.
Yeah, and these are averages, so that's the average value.
$20 increase versus $3 for last year.
So that is a 65,000. I wonder if it was 65,000 or 55, so it's 65,000.
65,
Okay,
yeah.
good.
65 at 65, and then it's frozen at 65.
Okay, that's a good way to remember it, 65 is 65.
So just a kind of a reminder of some of the efforts that the city has taken over the last several fiscal years. And as you know, in 17, we eliminated the $1.2 million transfer from utility to general. And this is when the rate structure was changed for utility base rates to make it transparent and very clear. In 18, we had the comp and class study that was fully funded. That was, again, one of those examples of taking the effective tax rate and then anything needed above that, justify that. And so that was one of the ways that it was justified by fully implementing that comp and class study. That was about $650,000.
Yeah.
And as we've said before, the lion's share of that went to police and fire. And of that, the lion's share went to fire. They were really a little bit far behind in terms of
They'd been
competitive pay.
Yeah, they've been left behind.
Right. And so that class and comp study really went a long way to help bring them up to the market. Internally, as a staff, as leadership, we implemented the hiring chill. We didn't freeze positions, but we asked departments to really take a hard look at them and try to operate without positions as they became vacant. We've added positions back, and we're going to talk about one with the city secretary's office here shortly in the general fund. But we've taken a look at those positions individually and not just automatically filled them, but can we operate more efficiently, and are they really needed? And a lot of that was kind of middle management that we identified could be absorbed or reallocated, things like that. Again, it continued in 19, lean staff model, operate efficiently. And then in 20 for this year, or for next year, we looked at, hardline look at every single expenditure. Is there anything that could be funded by a different source? And so we identified a few items that could be funded by capital and not in the general fund, and those were in the public works line item. And so we'll talk about those. But that was a way that we were able to absorb some of the increases and also adopt this effective tax rate.
So following through that logic, so we, last couple of years, continued operational efficiencies, among other things, but, you know, it's really tough to do this effective tax rate thing because you're holding revenue the same, and there are many costs that actually go up. So we keep squeezing down what we spend. We have to be more efficient because we're delivering the same services. Right. And I know you and me and Adrian and city manager had an interesting discussion a while back, kind of a long-term strategy discussion on how long can we do that? You know, when do you run out? There's no more blood, there's no more way to squeeze. And I was, I'm not going to go into all that right now. It's a very interesting discussion, and it was actually surprised me by the time we got through talking. We expect to be able to do this a couple more years longer than I thought we would. Is that what?
Yes.
That what we?
Yes.
Well,
The question is, you know, as we go further and further on our long-term financial strategy, at what point, you know, do you want to shift gears?
Yeah.
And gradually get away from that, or do you want to do an abrupt change?
Yeah.
Sure.
You know, from
Yeah.
the 0 to 3.5.
Yeah. So one thing out of that, I want to start telling the story publicly, get these thoughts organized in a rational manner so they can be talked about, and we can begin to educate people on kind of that long-term thinking and our whole strategy of how we're managing the finances at the bigger picture level.
Sure.
I think it's important that people understand that.
It's really important, and I think one thing, you know, we're adding, like the plaza and the medians.
Yeah.
So, to me, when you add capital like that,
Mhm.
you have to plan for operational
Yes,
increases.
right.
And so,
Yeah.
I think that's very justified to, you know, perhaps gradually move up, like you say, rather
Keep
than
those city
just a
services.
big abrupt jump.
Needs to be, well, it needs to be a rationale for why we're doing it, how we're doing it. People understand it.
Exactly.
It'll make sense.
Yep.
We have a huge advantage in this city because that TIF really works to our advantage.
Absolutely.
It's huge.
And you also have a great advantage that you have conservative leadership
Yeah.
who have applied a very consistent approach that has provided for funding for your capital improvements and long-term planning as to how you manage your cash, so that you're not in a situation where you are considering debt, which has to be paid for out of the same fund, and thus depleting your operating funds that way.
Yeah.
Sure.
But I think that it's also important to note that the way that the new tax cap law is set up, the 3.5% limitation does allow for carry forward. So you have an opportunity to phase that in and still have some protection should there be an unforeseen circumstance occur in a year that you didn't anticipate and you have to deal with. So
Sure.
while there has been a lot of negativity about that cap, it does provide some flexibility as well.
Yeah.
And we're very healthy. I mean,
Oh, yeah,
going through the
we're
our
very
budgets
healthy.
and our
Absolutely.
economic boards and stuff like that, knowing staff placing different positions on there where we're investing. I mean, we are doing very well right now, very, very well. Colleyville is blessed, like you say.
Extremely blessed.
You have excellent staff that does a great job. with it.
Absolutely.
We alignment on what we're trying to do.
Got a great team.
Yeah. That's the way teams are supposed to work.
Absolutely. So the first fund we're going to look at is the general fund. What's highlighted in blue is the projected fiscal 2020 budget. As you can see, we're projecting a $406,000 surplus at the end of the year, with revenues at $24.5 million, expenditures at $24.1 million, almost $24.2 million, so a difference of $406,000. What you'll see is the ad valorem taxes at $15 million. Compared to last year's budget, there's a little bit of a jump there. But if you look at the year-end projection for the current fiscal year, what you'll remember last year is that the city, when we did our budgeting process, we did not budget for the new growth revenue, but we're still taking that in.
Right.
So what you see reflected is the new growth, and we are taking that into account for the fiscal 2020 budget.
And I think there's two other things too, correct me if I'm wrong, but when the tax assessor gives us our numbers, they exclude probably more protest. They exclude some value
Yes.
because of protests and other things, and they probably overdo that. So in the end, we actually get revenue off of some of that they exclude at this point of the year.
Right.
Yes.
Absolutely.
But it's important to note the difference between the ad valorem tax collection and the budget for budgeted 19 and actual collection of 19 is the result of new growth, new construction, new property value added to the tax rolls, not the existing taxpayers.
Right.
And that new growth carries over again into 20. And so you have a growth in the revenue that is not related to the quote-unquote existing taxpayers.
Right.
Got it.
Yep.
Absolutely.
Yeah, that's a good point.
And something else I think that I'm sure you're probably gonna get to is the day of fund balance. You know, we,
Yes.
90 days and look, we're
Right.
151,
Yeah.
just in
Yeah.
case. So we got another security blanket right
Yeah,
there.
we're gonna reduce that
And
this year a little
Yeah, and
bit.
that goes in the whole discussion of how good of a shape we're in,
Yeah.
and we have options to, continue this strategy going forward.
I think it's great. I mean, I'd rather have to, enough set off to the side than be
Yes.
struggling and wondering where it's gonna come from. So-
Absolutely.
The only question is, should it be here or should it be in the capital fund where it
Yeah.
spills into?
Yeah, if we're
But either
needing
way,
to-
it's still reserved for future
Yeah,
expenditures.
we
Yeah.
needed, we have it.
Absolutely.
And I also want to point out that on the revenue side, we took a hard look at revenues this year, and we actually reduced some revenues for projections because of
See
the
those,
new construction
yeah.
starts and the fines that have seen a decrease in fines, whether that's due to, a new policing model, more community-oriented policing, or just the construction along 26, whatever that reason is, so we reduced that. We reduced the charges for service because we're seeing a lot more nonprofits utilize the Colleyville Center as opposed to private business, so they pay a lower rate. And so the kind of the philosophy of the Colleyville Center is starting to shift a little bit. And so we reflected that in terms of revenue dropping.
Franchise fees.
Franchise fees, about to get to that, yeah. So the legislation that passed basically allows telecommunication providers to pick one of the franchise fees that they're paying, either for cable or TV, even though they're both using our right-of-way. And so we reflected that in our projections. And so we've decreased that from last year's budget by a couple $100,000. The licenses and permits, you can see last year's budget was $975. We believe we're going to exceed that for the end of the year. But we also think that looking at new home starts and how subdivisions are starting to become built out, that's not going to continue on forever.
Exactly.
So we think that next year is kind of a reset year. We have increased it slightly going forward, but that's really due to tear downs, remodeling,
Exactly.
those type of permits, as opposed to new home starts. And so we reflected that, and that kind of carries through not only building permits, but then mechanical and plumbing and all the other permits that you see. One area that we did increase actually was in miscellaneous income, and that's primarily due to interest income. So this year, city manager and I take a look at our investments and determined that we were missing out on some opportunity. We still follow the Public Funds and Investment Act of liquidity and safety and availability of the cash as the utmost priority. But we were receiving, I think it was 12 basis points in a sweep account. We changed that, and now it's at over 2% for that, and so we're
Just
far
200
exceeding.
basis points.
Yeah. And so we're far exceeding our budgeted projections, and so we increased that for next year.
Wonderful. Yeah, that's a big deal.
Yeah.
Yeah. That's a great example of being smart about how you manage your money.
Sure.
What you guys are doing. Licenses and permits, you mentioned you were talking about that. Theoretically, licenses and permits kind of cover the cost of what it takes us to go out and do those things.
Sure.
Yes.
Correct.
But we expect an adjustment both in the number of permits issued,
Yeah.
but also in the type of permit. And as we transition away from the value permit system to a price per square foot system, there is a likelihood that we'll see some diminished value from that. So it's kind of a twofold issue. One, less actual permits overall, and two, change in the way they're valued. And so Mark conservatively estimated that, to taking that into account. And you may see that change in future years as well, as we make that transformation you talked about.
But we may need to adjust that too. That's a potential too, right?
Yes.
And the last one I want to point out is the sales tax. As you can see, we budgeted for 20 for next year, the same that we budgeted for 19.
Mhm.
We've kind of had I don't know if roller coaster is the right word, but we've kind of been up and down this year. We've gone up 8, down 8,
Yeah.
up 5, down 5. So we're really watching that closely and seeing where that goes.
Sure.
So we didn't want to project an increase just to project an increase. We wanted to be thoughtful about it. And so we thought next year it'd probably wise just to keep it at budget. Likely, I'm guessing we'll probably exceed that, but I'd rather not count on that revenue than not have it and not get it.
We got a bunch of property over in Market Street available for new businesses, hopefully, with them start coming in.
Want to point out on the expenditure side that we are still committed to the $1.5 million for the capital improvement projects.
I mean, you look at that budget, it's really kind of amazing to me. We put $1.5 million in the capital, paid cold cash, projecting a net revenue of $400,000, even with an effective tax rate.
Absolutely.
That just highlights how good a job you guys do.
We also believe the year-end projection
Yeah.
will exceed the
It will exceed,
613.
yeah.
Yes.
Always.
As we get closer to the end of the year, it'll tighten up a little bit more.
Yeah.
We have predictions on what that's going to be.
Yeah.
Between-
Is that for a bag of burgers or some
No,
bigger
we're still waiting.
steaks? Yeah, always. Okay,
It's a first
okay.
Wants to weigh in, feel free to.
Right.
I've got $1 million.
I've got
Jerry has
1.2.
1.2.
Wow.
Mary has 1.1.
I have 850.
There you go.
See where it falls out.
1.2.
Conservative.
That's it. Always conservative.
Aggressive.
Aggressive.
I also want to point out that on the expenditure side, you know, we're keeping the same service levels and actually increasing service levels in a lot of cases. So that those expenditures include the total absorption of the employee health insurance cost, 6% increase. That includes one new firefighter for our fire department. They've been asking for that, and so we're going to provide that for them. It includes reclassification of 3 fire positions to field supervising officers. So as we shift to more of a EMS-driven fire department response model, we have the new squad, and so they've asked to reclassify 3 positions, 1 per shift, to be more efficient in that response and also to be better at that response in terms of reporting and really making sure that our EMS operations are top-notch and efficient, and so it includes that as well. It includes reclassifying city secretary's part-time position to full-time. That was one of those positions that became vacant, and we were taking a hard look at it, and we said, okay, you know, if you can justify these type of positions, let us know. We're happy to take a look at it. She did. She put in research and time and justified that during the budget process, and so the answer was pretty clear to us, and so we're recommending that position go to full-time as well.
Awesome. Great.
So as you can see, the service levels are at or better than they are this year. So.
I tell you, I have to say this, I gotta compliment you guys. I mean, I'm sitting here thinking, I've been in many, many budget meetings, talking about a lot of money in companies. And this is exactly the same kind of conversation we'd have about how you getting more efficient, how you taking the expense side down, still deliver the service. That's just how companies run. I mean, they're good companies.
But rarely do you have such positive outcomes, I feel
Yeah.
like, with
Well,
reduction in.
Yeah, and you always like,
It's
the
wonderful.
next, you always push it to the point where
Right.
next year you say what I said a while ago.
Right.
How in the world are we gonna do this again?
Yeah.
And you do it again. And that's what you
It's
guys are
exceptional.
demonstrating. So
That's great.
I say all that just to say, I have said this numerous times to people, and I will continue to say it. This city really runs like a small business versus a government operation.
It's a huge difference.
It's huge difference. Huge, people
Should be
can't
run that way.
appreciate that, but it's huge.
Absolutely.
I think the one thing you should look for just in the future, the little trick that gets you to the number we're projecting, is you notice the expenditures are exactly the same as budget. And so what we're banking on or what predicting is the revenues are based upon where we think they're actually trending right now. So it's a little more accurate depiction. The expenditures, what you're really waiting on is to find out how efficiently within our operations we were able to come in under budget.
Sure.
And so that's where you're, because I know some of your questions were, wow, the diversity of our guesses, it's really in that element that the
Sure.
value is yet to be assessed.
Sure.
I'm guessing about 580,000.
You're talking about for the year projection?
Yeah.
Number?
Yeah.
Yeah.
And so if it's 580,000, that'll put it right at the 1 point.
Just
He's
saying.
gonna make sure that.
Yeah.
1.2.
No. And that's no unfairness. But that's
Okay.
that's the challenge.
Got it
of
on
this.
record.
It is a challenge to assess
He's
that.
got eagle eyes on that. There's nothing, yeah.
Yeah.
But it is fun, but it is a lot of work, and Mark really put a lot of work in on this effort and made what is a very complicated process look very simple.
Another awesome job.
Yeah.
You guys are amazing.
All right, so in terms of how this breaks out in terms of revenue and expenditures, on the revenue side, you can see the property taxes are 61% of the general fund. Sales tax is at 16%, and then franchise fees at 8%, and then after that, you've kind of got the others that take up a smaller percentage. But in terms of expenditures, you've got public safety at 48%, so nearly half of the general fund budget is in police and fire. And then you couple that with public works at 16%, you're at about almost 65% of our budget is either public safety or infrastructure. So that's a pretty good piece of the pie, if you will.
Absolutely.
General fund expenditures by department. Just want to point out a few things. As
You
you
sure
can-
need to cut the council expenditure.
Yeah, exactly. So I do want to point out why that went up a little bit.
George.
It typically does not.
He eats too much.
I've seen his
the pot roast.
It's all the pot roast from market.
Love pot roast.
So the reason why that went up just a little bit was the agency agreements that came through. Grace requested a little bit more, and then Metroport Meals on Wheels requested a little bit more. And so we went ahead and recommended their request, and so that's why it went up a little bit on the council
So it's
side.
not George's eating?
No.
No, oh.
Fortunately, not.
It's
And Mark,
charity.
For those that can't read it at home, it went up $2,750.
Yeah, $2,750.
Out of 200,000.
Out of a $209,000 budget, yeah.
And it's for nonprofits that give back to the community.
Yeah.
That's
Proud to
great.
give that too. Those guys deserve it.
I won't go through every single one of these, but just want to point out a couple. The city secretary, as you can see, went up 38,000. That's for the new position, or the reclassified position. Fire department up 307,000. That's the new firefighter, the reclassification of the 3 firefighters to FSOs, and that's also bumping up the
What's FSO?
overtime budget, the field supervising officer.
Okay.
That's also bumping up the overtime budget, $75,000. That's something that's been, over the last few years, it's kind of remained at $200,000 in an overtime budget.
Yeah.
But they've far exceeded that every year. Now, Mark Cantrell, I wish he was here, give him a big kudos. He's actually knocked that down a lot.
Good.
In his time that he's been fire chief. That's one of the challenges that we gave him, was take a look at that overtime and figure out how we're gonna bring this down. And so he's done tremendous work in that.
Yeah, we hope we have enough staff to,
Yeah, and that.
you can't eliminate it.
Right. No, you can't eliminate it.
Yeah.
Just circumstances, but
Bringing on the extra
the
firefighter.
one firefighter is going to help.
Yeah,
Sure,
for
sure. Absolutely.
And then some of the strategies that he's been involved with have really helped bring that down. So
A huge change he made was not taking the apparatuses to the
Yeah, to the call.
the
Medical
calls. on-
so
on
that
the
squad
medical
is
calls. Yeah.
the squad goes to EMS
Dramatic.
calls, and that's
Yeah.
cut
He's got
down
more
dramatically
changes in
on
that
that.
area coming as
Yeah.
well.
And that's
Mark-
gonna make a huge difference on the lifetime of our
Vehicles.
apparatus.
Yes. But Mark, your point is valid, that in the budget, if one year you have an anomaly, that's worth noting. If you have it occurring over multiple years, at some point, you gotta change the
It's
budget.
an issue.
And so what Mark did was raised the overtime budget, even though that's uncomfortable to do because it's increasing a cost and expenditure, but he did so because the trend was clear that they weren't meeting it anyway.
Yeah.
And so he addressed it twofold. One is, let's talk about how we can get it under control, but let's talk about, is this a real number that should be budgeted, and not pretend that it's something else.
Sure.
And that was a proper strategy to deal with that issue.
That's great.
A couple others that I'll mention, the street maintenance. You see the 495 decrease, so we're still undergoing those projects. It's just moved from general fund to the capital fund, which is where it should have been.
Right.
Not that it's wrong to be in the general fund, but it's, if you take a look at where it could go, it can be funded out of capital. It's better
Well,
to
that,
do that.
It's so
than
much
to operate.
easier.
I would think that with a significant number of miles of streets that we've repaired,
Right.
that the maintenance on those streets is certainly declined because we've done, how many? I don't know.
Yeah, but this street maintenance includes that resurfacing.
I understand.
includes-
Oh, it does.
It's a lot of capital items that were previously in the operating budget.
Okay, so it's moved to county, that's great.
The fleet services, this was again another kind of operational efficiency effort. The fleet services manager retired this summer, and so this is one of the positions that we said we can really take a look at this and kind of reassign some duties. still provide the same service. Part of those, that effort will be later tonight when Adrian talks about the enterprise fleet management contract. So kind of looking at more efficient ways to run that area. And
Where
so
will
that's-
that show up?
Reduction in the operating budget for the department.
No, but I mean, where do those costs show up?
The fleet services line?
Fleet services, there's
That's the
a,
salary.
No,
Oh, you're talking about enterprise.
As a reduce,
Oh.
yeah. So where does enterprise show up?
In the vehicle purchase within the
Oh,
operating
okay,
budget.
okay.
Sorry, we thought you were talking about that.
No, I'm talking about
Enterprise.
in my enterprise in the back of my head. We're spending it someplace and it's
Yes.
just, yeah, okay.
And it's our vehicle replacement. It's just
Okay.
a different schedule than was initially because now they're being expedited
Right,
to meet
and
that
we
new schedule.
pay them versus showing it up here.
You still show it up here, but it wouldn't show up as a change because you're already budgeting for those vehicles to be replaced.
I
And so you'd be paying for it out of one of your funds in the,
All I'm saying
Budget.
is, when we go to enterprise, we're in a situation where we're paying them to do some of the maintenance, right?
We're paying
A
them
very
to
small
set
maintenance.
budget.
It's folded in.
Yes.
It's folded in.
Absolutely.
So it's some of it that is moved off of here too.
Right.
yes, but those savings were net of this issue.
I understand.
Those weren't being offset by
Okay.
this.
All right.
So that would have been too much moving
Okay.
around.
The facility services increase is due to some needed increased maintenance in some of the fire stations and some of the buildings that are starting to age. And so we increased that budget to do that. That was offset by some of the decreases in the other public works areas as well. So next, we'll talk about general fund revenues. We kind of have talked about a lot of these, but I just want to kind of highlight, these are all the revenues. I thought it was kind of neat to see these listed out in terms of what we collect. I mean, you can see the property taxes at the top, sales tax. You can see the reflection in these four right here of the legislation,
Yeah.
franchise legislation. You can see our building permit, plumbing permit, mechanical, the reduction right there.
325.
As well as the fines on the right side.
Maybe when we get the roads opened up, speeding will pick up and we'll. There we go. There we go.
Put Chief on his motorcycle out there.
There's a method to the madness here. We remove the barrels and they're gonna zoom through.
My nephew is donating to that fund twice in like the
That's
last
right.
month.
How about, well,
He's
thank you.
turned 16. so
Thank you so much. That's wonderful.
Happy to help.
Starting strong, huh?
Yeah. Wow.
Yeah. So moving on to the utility fund, what you see here is the costs in blue are the city's cost to put on the utility. The costs in yellow are the TRA cost, which is a pass-through cost. As you know, the city recovers its costs and our base rates through the water and wastewater base rates. And those costs are determined by what's in blue on that chart. So the total budget is $17.5 million. And we are recommending for 1-inch meters, that's your typical household in Colleyville.
Yep.
That's the majority of the customers. So we're actually recommending what we were able to do last year. And that is, we were able to, through our operational efficiencies, reduce the water base rate and the wastewater base rate. And so we're recommending taking that incremental difference and adding it to the CIP base rate. If you remember, the CIP base rate is the base rate that's charged every month to help contribute to future CIP projects for utility projects. And so we're recommending increasing that with the incremental difference of 43 cents, bringing the total CIP to 272. But what you'll notice is that the total rate that the customer will pay did not change.
That's
And
great.
for all meters,
26.55.
Correct. Everybody's.
That's amazing.
Yep, everybody.
Yep.
It really is amazing.
That is, works
Yeah.
great.
This is what, 3 years in a row?
Yeah.
So that 43 cents is, approximately $50,000 additional into the capital,
It's key.
utility capital. I think that next year, we'll need to kind of take a look at that CIP rate and see, kind of
Sure.
project out future. Okay, is it time to look at that and start,
Sure.
incrementally
Yeah,
increasing
implement
that
it, yeah.
for future projects? so that'll kind of be a fiscal year '21 discussion. But for this fiscal year, we're able to recommend this. These rates are approved along with the budget in September. The TRA rates are volumetric rates, are pass-through rates, what the customer pays per 1,000 gallons that they use. It's a straight pass-through. Those rates are, their fiscal years are different than ours. They're on a calendar year. So we'll bring those forward for approval in December.
Right.
And again, it's set by TRA. We don't really have any control over that.
Going back to those utility rates, if I remember right, when the utility committee made their recommendation, we implemented it. We actually got kind of 2 free years, because we expected to have to start raising the CIP right off the bat the next year. And we haven't had to do it because the city's been very efficient.
Not only that, but we've been getting money back
Yeah.
from the TRA, which
You'll get
also-
that, you'll get that this year again, too.
I know we will,
But
yeah.
you're right, though, about the CIP.
So that adds to it, so.
Yeah.
The nice part about your plan is that allows you to, again, turn on the spigot slowly, so you
Sure.
can build
Yes,
up the
right.
CIP.
Exactly.
It's a water reference for those.
It was a good one.
Turn it on slow. Especially for
Yeah.
wastewater. You want that wastewater flooding out.
No gray water.
No gray
No
water.
gray water.
Purple pipe.
The
is
water
that what-
gates.
That's it. We got a water gate, just opening it, the water gate just slightly.
These were the projected TRA rates that they provided for us last year when we approved their rate that shows, so this is the current, what customers currently pay. And as you see, it increases. These were what they were projecting last fall, and we'll get these from them here shortly. But this is what they were provided last fall.
And Mark, it's worth
Yep.
noting, those were 10% plus type increases, so increases the residents will see are directly pass-throughs.
Yep.
And so it's important to note that.
Yeah.
And it's so significant, I mean, it's so significant that we're not throwing something on top of that, that's what was happening before.
Yeah.
It's just, feel really blessed that we made the decisions. It's great.
Moving to the next fund, the drainage fund. This is a very small fund, but it is an operational fund, and so it's approved with the annual budget. This primarily is used for personnel. You can see this is all personnel for drainage-related projects. So this year it's been very, very important to have these personnel paid for with this fund. This is a fee that's $7 per month per customer fee is paid, so that's where the revenues come from. And so, again, we're projecting a surplus of $182,000. We do have a pretty healthy fund balance on this as well, so we could look at some point in the future of, potentially spending that money on projects.
And Mark, part of that was the removal of the drainage master plan
Right.
from this fund,
It was in this fund, it was moved out, paid for by the TIF.
which preserved the cash for actual drainage-related issues in the future.
So we have a potential for taking some of this for projects, for sure.
Yep, or even drainage concerns, or
Sure. Yeah.
street sweep, additional street
Lots
sweep,
of
or
stuff.
whatever you want to do.
Exactly.
The last fund that we'll talk about, and then we'll get into CIP quickly, is the debt service fund. As we've already pointed out, the total debt service that is owed next year has dropped dramatically. So we're at 1.4, and then it continues to drop down after that. As you can see, the CCCPD has completely dropped off for next year.
That's great.
That's good news. So INS tax rate, again, went down slightly to 0.016,379. We are recommending the purchase of a ambulance next fiscal year in the same model that we've done in the past, where we put a down payment down with the use of available cash, and they make a monthly payment. So we're recommending that be a 3-year, $120,000 payment. That will basically replace an ambulance, take the reserve ambulance, move it off, move the current second ambulance into a reserve status. And we're trying to get on a kind of a 3-year replacement of these ambulances.
Wow.
But we'll go from one working ambulance in the
To two.
past to now 3.
Exactly.
Oh,
And
3?
3, and then we'll be able to
Cover from
better
any station.
provide our service, for our medical runs, which are our primary
Yeah.
response.
Councilmember
great.
Dodson pointed out earlier, the general obligation debt paid off in 2028, so coming
Sorry
pretty
about
close
that.
enough.
That's a good thing.
It's a great thing.
Gary looked
Wow.
at about $11 million total,
just
total
under 11.
debt on the books right now.
So just a summary by fund: general fund, operating revenues 24.5 million, expenditures 24.2. Utility fund, cover our costs with the base rates. Drainage fund, 978 compared to 795, and then debt service we pay with
Great.
minus tax rate. So all in all, great shape.
No kidding.
Just a quick reminder, there are other operating budgets that kind of have follow their own process. The CCCPD, the CEDC. So tonight at the council meeting is the second reading of the CCCPD. There's certain state law requirements and things that cause these to follow different timelines in the regular budget. And so CCCPD will be considered tonight for final approval. And that's 12 officers contained within that fund, 1 new sergeant, moving 1 officer from general fund to the CCCPD. So it's a very beneficial fund for the city and the police department, and allows them to really operate a really top-notch department.
Yep.
CEDC, we have a budget work session next week, followed by a board meeting at the end of August, and then I'll come to council for approval in September. And then, we have the 5-year CIP, and various boards and committees make recommendations on how to fund those projects through TIF and other different mechanisms. We will bring forward the annual year-end budget amendment in September for the first reading, and then approval at the second meeting in September. As you know, we take the excess funds, transfer that to capital for future capital projects, both in the general fund and utility capital, as well as drainage. And so we will do that, and then we also recommend and have a discussion about transferring some of that fund balance that we've talked about in the general fund. We have 150 days currently. Do we want to drop that down a little bit, move some at the capital, or are we comfortable keeping it within the general fund totally? And so we'll have that discussion as well.
Is it the case that if we move it and then have an emergency, that we can't move it back? That's correct, right?
You could always draw from your capital back into your operating, but I don't see that happening here for a
Yeah,
long time.
I don't either, but that's one of the advantages of leaving it in operation fund.
Yeah, and that's why your policy of the fund balance of 90 days
Sure.
and your implementation of the past 100 days is a useful tool. You can pick somewhere in between, but at some point, the fund balance accumulating at that high of a level is unnecessary.
You would
and
not be
should be
restricted.
considered in your capital.
Cool.
If you needed to move it back, you would not be restricted.
No, I think you used to do that in the past.
You got also to the fact that if you let it build up too high, somebody would come up with a fine idea, well, honestly reduce the taxes.
Exactly,
Million
exactly.
Versus putting it in the capital fund.
Good point. That's a good point.
But
I
it's
know.
not a big deal at all. I think it'd be worthy of a conversation at the time as to why something extraordinary would have motivated it, but it's not.
Sure. Okay, good.
So the last
Great.
couple of slides talk about the CIP. And again, we've had the CIP separate work session, so I'm not going to talk about every single one of these projects. But basically, the CIP is the capital improvement plan. It provides a 5-year look at future capital projects to make sure that we're planning appropriately for when big projects are going to happen, like road construction, utility replacement, different things like that, facilities. And so we take a look at that annually, and the funding sources as well, and identify those projects. So for the 2020 projects, Ray's group is going to be very busy. We've got a lot of projects on the books. It's about a $38 million CIP recommendation. And so it's a pretty healthy, and all funded with cash, by the way. So you can see we have drainage improvements recommended, facility improvements to various facilities, from fire stations to the Colleyville Center to City Hall and the library. We've got we need to rename that, the business center that we're proposing, as well as land acquisition, and some exciting restroom facility projects at various parks, Nature Center, Reagan Park, and City Park. A couple of master plans that are projected for next fiscal year, as well as some parks and recreation projects, city park baseball field warm-up areas, some landscaping improvements, parkway tree removal and replacement down our major corridors, playground at Sparta Park, as well as sidewalks and trails. So set aside a pretty good amount of money for new trails within the city. So we've applied for a lot of grants for some different trails. So we have money set aside that if we're successful in receiving those grants, that we can have matching funds to go ahead and do those projects. We've also included John McCain Road Trail to connect some missing links, as well as the Cheeks Parker Trail that we're hopeful to partner with Bedford on. We've had conversations with them. Going into streets, we've got Roberts Road, Cheeks Parker, Glade Road, all for next fiscal year, as well as State Highway 26 beautification efforts that we're currently going through the design process with our design firm Mesa. And so a lot of those projects are going to be coming up here very shortly. So as 26 starts to wrap up, the city will come in and make it really beautiful. And we also are not forgetting about our other streets. Glade Roads, the utilities are moving right now as we speak. And we'll begin that in the spring, and the other major projects as well.
I've got a question for you on the slide before. Is there a way to be proactive with our roundabouts that we're putting up to get our, go ahead and start discussing what we're going to put in the mid-level?
Yeah, the design for the
Me too.
Are you talking about
McDonald
the two new
School.
ones? We actually have a work session coming to you, Ray, and I've been working together on that. We'll be discussing some options for you all to pick out, probably your August 20th meeting.
Okay.
John McCain Westcote might be too small, but the other one.
We'll fix it. We'll find something. We'll put a picture of Mark out there waving.
Yeah.
Great.
Lots of racks after that.
Yeah.
The water and wastewater project. One of these is the SCADA replacement. It's a very kind of technologically driven project for our public works group. Water line at Pleasant Run Water Line, Port City limits. So those are the CIP projects for 2020.
The water tower is not on there?
No.
Because they're,
Renovation.
It goes
Oh, the
21.
renovation.
that's
Yes.
21, right?
No, it's, that's current.
I don't see it on
This
there.
year.
It's current fiscal year.
Probably this year.
That's correct, yeah, it's current fiscal year.
Oh, is it?
Yeah.
Oh, okay.
Yep.
It'll get started this year, won't
Yeah.
be done.
Which is a valid point in what was mentioned, is there's a lot of work here. Odds are not all of these will be
Right.
expended.
Can't be.
Yeah.
And so they'll carry over, or they'll be
Right. Reprioritized.
reconsidered,
Moved.
reprogrammed.
Yeah.
But we are aggressive.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Very
Absolutely.
aggressive.
Ought to be.
Let's get a plan out there.
That's right.
That's right.
This is what we plan to do.
Yeah, these are a lot of.
We got the money, we need to move when we can.
It's been
There's the need out there. Definitely need.
So just a wrap-up slide, key accomplishments for this proposed budget. Effective tax rate, again, second consecutive year, is something we should all be very proud of. Balanced budget, fiscal management is demonstrated, expands our public safety services, police and fire. Again, that's just about half of the general fund budget, and we're expanding those services. Maintains the overall utility base rates, includes investment and replacement of our infrastructure. And again, it furthers our beautification efforts that the city has been undertaking this past year.
Yeah, you got me specifically on the 1-inch
Yeah,
residential.
it's all of them. Should be all of them, yeah.
Absolutely.
So will we have to have two city meetings over this to pass it, or can we do one because it's just
Good
the
segue.
effective tax rate?
So we will have to do 2 readings. It's an
Yeah.
ordinance that requires 2 readings, so we'll do those in September.
I thought the law said that we could do it in one.
We
if
don't
it's
need
effective.
an extra public hearing because we're doing the effective tax rate.
Right.
The public hearing.
If we were doing not the effective tax rate, then we'd have to have an extra public hearing.
Okay.
So we will, again, we've got this slated for September 3rd and 17th at your meetings there for final adoption. We'll approve the budget, the tax rate, the year-end transfer ordinance, as well as the CEDC and all the other.
Thank you very much.
We want to jump for joy for you guys.
Yeah, team effort, for sure.
Well done.
All of you
Such a
guys.
dramatic difference from when we first started several years ago.
We're
Great,
doing
thank
well.
you.
Amazing.
Thank you very much. Okay.
Thank you.
Brings us to item 3, which is just discussion of regular agenda items. I do have a couple of things. Let me pass this out. I had made some, asked Christina to make a couple of modifications to the resolution from the sidewalk committee.
Just need to go down to the attorney.
No, I don't think so. I just wanted you guys to have a copy. Is this an extra copy?
One more.
Oh,
Is it 4401? Okay.
It already gave you, okay.
Oh, you're
Yeah. So this is the one I'm gonna read. What's the difference? The difference was simply putting the Parks and Recreation names on there, and under section 3, it reordered and added a couple of phrases on A and B. It said identify and prioritize need and rationale. We wanna know the rationale and thought process for those on A and B. C is kind of the same. C will be giving them a starting point map. We have the 2008 sidewalk map, we have the Trails Master Plan. We'll put all that on one map that committee can start with that and then recommend from there. So it'll be easier to end up with one map that we want.
Absolutely.
And then the last one is develop a party-based recommendation and rationale. Okay, how do we implement what are the priority and rationale for priority to how we make policy decisions on doing that. There were 2 others. One had to do with identifying grant funding. We already know what the grant fund possibilities are. And the last one had to do with a statement about making an implementation plan that was too vague and unclear, and I didn't know what it meant even myself. And so I think this makes it more succinct. Committees need very clear direction on what to do. So I think so that's why the change. And so I'll read this one when we get to that item on the agenda. Regarding that one, we always talk, so we have appointments to make, and so we had a number of great applications. So as I always do, as mayor, I kind of go through those and analyze them and give you my thoughts. And so, Kathy needs one. George, you already have one. And so, let me explain to you what this means. So, so 3 are Parks Board, they're already in there, 4 are at large. So these are all the applicants in that second column. I put their address, I actually mapped all the addresses on the map to see where they were, make sure we were getting a distribution. We have 4 to do, indicated the subdivisions. My recommendations, personal recommendation is Dave Dujak and Don Hithcock are the top 2 to me. Dave Dujak, I've known him for years. He's lived here for 26 years. He's been on P&Z for a number of years. He was instrumental in Kimsey Park. He's been very committed, very active in all the park operation for years and years. Knows how things work. I think he's been around a long time. Don, I've talked to him. I actually hadn't met him, but we emailed a lot. He sent in a proposal for interconnecting trails in the city. This was done several months ago, and I don't know if you all had a chance to see that or look at it, but he's a civil engineer, so he does this kind of work. Sure. I thought he did a fantastic job. He put a lot of effort in. Actually, that presentation actually down to pictures and proposals for interconnectivity, and so clearly he ought to be on there. So the other 2 is I had on here Brandy Slager and Tommy Snyder, but I showed 4, and here's what I was looking for. Number 1, criteria, always. We want people that have the best interests of the city at heart and putting forth effort. 2, that the master plan is real critical. That's our strategy. That's where we go. We want people that are in alignment with the master plan and what we're trying to do in Colleyville from critical success factors. And then, what have they done? What have they demonstrated? And so, now anyway, Randy and Tommy Snyder, however, the other is 3 in blue. I've heard those names from other people. Those are all good people too. They meet all those criteria. So, those are my thoughts.
Have
So I
those
know
considered as we go.
Bobby came in a little early. He said you talked to Tommy Snyder. You kind of wanted to go with Matt
Yeah,
Little.
I do, because he's kind of like Don. He has a lot of experience on the SW3Ps, NOIs,
Okay.
ditch replacements, where to lay sidewalk, tree, mitigations and stuff like that. This guy would know how a sidewalk should fit, what would be reasonable, the whole 9 yards. He owns his own business as well, so he's pretty physically responsible of, that type of, dealing with money as well. So I thought he'd be a great replacement. I talked to Tommy, and Tommy said that he, or Tammy had talked to Tommy, and Tommy said that he would pull out of the way. That's just my recommendation is Matt Little. I thought that and he's been here for 14 years. So he's been invested in this community for quite some time.
So that's one. There may be other comments on other people. Bottom line in all this is we got plenty of good applicants.
A lot of them. It's kind of a hard choice, really and truly.
It's great.
Yeah.
I mean, I would like to speak up for Larry Williamson.
Yeah.
He's, number one, he's in my neighborhood.
Yeah.
His father lives next door.
Yeah.
He went through high school here,
Yeah.
I went to high school.
went to LA, so understands and taught school in LA, has come back and now is an air traffic controller. So he's someone who understands the movement of things through multiple spaces. And I think he really has a good handle on what Colleyville needs.
So he's been in Colleyville
He's been
as a
in-
young person and as an
Yes.
adult, so that's kind of an interesting perspective too.
His application was really good, too.
It was.
Yeah,
So was Lynn's. Lynn's was.
Lynn is
Yeah.
another person I talked to that I thought really
Yeah.
brought a good perspective
Yeah.
to the,
So they're
a different perspective.
candidates.
I like that we have some folks that are very
Yeah.
experienced in
Okay.
that industry, but I'd like to have some folks who have
different perspective.
different perspective and experience in the city.
Okay, so what I'd like to do is I don't like to deliberate in here. We'll go out there. I'll say similar things, but we can have that kind of discussion so everybody can hear.
I think that's great.
And then we can zoom in. I really want those two that are in the boxes. The others, let's talk about.
Sounds good.
Okay,
Don't
and
think we
then,
can go wrong.
where we end up, whoever makes the motion for approval, then we'll end up with 4 and put them in the motion. Okay. Seemed like there was one other thing. What was it?
So what, code changes maybe?
Pardon?
The code changes or anything like that?
No, let me quickly scan the agenda. It just seemed like there was one other thing I was gonna mention about the agenda, but it's escaping me. It's nothing to.
There's nothing to move off or anything.
No.
The Pool Road isn't on here.
No,
No,
it's
it's
not,
not.
it's nothing.
Next one.
Yeah.
We do have I have no idea if there's gonna be people here tonight for the appointments. It's at the very end. We do have a couple of items on here that may have some discussion, a more lengthy discussion on our ordinances, on around the code changes. So I'll ask if there's people here for 7B, and if there are a number of people, I may ask if we can move it up so I don't have to sit through the whole meeting to get there.
Okay.
Very good. Anything else? All right, then I'm going to close the work session at 6:33, and we're going to move into executive session in accordance with Texas Government Code, Chapter 551, Subchapter D, Section 551.071 Legal, Section 551.072 Real Estate, and Section 551.087 Economic Development. We're now in executive session. Pete?
It was funny, I was gonna mention that